Hello. Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'm going to give this a few moments for people to join. It says there's 6 people here, but I don't know if that's true or not because I just went live, but I'd love to know who's here. Hopefully you can hear me. So as we just kind of gather, as we come into this space together, just give yourself a few moments to kind of settle in. Whatever else was going on before you joined this live, just let yourself be in this space in this time. Whatever you were doing before, if you need to get back to it, it'll be there when you're done. Or maybe you move on to something different. But whatever is going on outside of this, it can wait. At least I'm pretty sure it can probably wait. So just take a few moments and settle into this space. Wherever you're at, if you're home or outside, just allow yourself this time that we're going to spend together to be just for you, something that you get to do to relax, to connect, just to be, not have to do anything, not have to be anybody to anybody else. Just getting to be with yourself, with us, wherever you're at, however you're feeling. And just let yourself kind of take some breaths to make sure that you're breathing and settle in together. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So I don't really have a specific agenda. This really was just an opportunity for us to connect, for us to just spend this time together and be in this space together, to just share what's going on, what you're struggling with, if there's anything you're looking forward to. There's a lot going on, and I keep saying that, but unfortunately it continues to be true. So I know a lot of people are struggling. The holidays are coming up, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But no specific agenda. And for the Q&A, you can ask anything. It doesn't have to be specific to abuse, or necessarily even categorized as mental health, I suppose. That is my area of expertise, but this is kind of a conversation. So we can talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. Welcome, everybody. Happy to have you here. So, how are you doing on this Thursday afternoon or evening or Friday morning if you're here live? Obviously, if you're not here live, then it could be any day. But how are you doing? How have you been holding up? How are you feeling as much of the world is in another phase of increased positive rates and more hospitalizations, more concerns? The holidays are coming and the advisory is not to travel. Holidays are stressful enough for most people. Adding this on top of it certainly adds a whole lot more that you're dealing with. Even if it feels like it's kind of a nice excuse to not have to get together with a bunch of people, which really may be the case, but it still may not feel great because it's kind of out of our control, and that often doesn't feel very good. So, hello, everybody. So share, how are you doing? Is there anything in particular that you'd like to talk about? Anything going on that we might be able to address? Certainly any questions. I'm not going to do questions just at the end. I know a lot of times when I do a video, I'll do the Q&A part at the end. I'll answer questions at the end, but this is not a normal live video where I'm coming with a specific topic to talk about. So whatever you'd like to talk about, That's what we're here for. If I can find my glasses, sorry. I guess that would help. What are your opinions on EMDR for trauma processing? So I've actually done a couple of videos on this, probably more than a couple, but I don't remember if I've done any specific to EMDR, so it wouldn't be in the title. So my knowledge, my anecdotal experience from clients, I am not an EMDR therapist, and that's for a very specific reason. What I have witnessed and heard from people who have experienced EMDR for long-term trauma or complex trauma or childhood trauma is that there can often seem, not always, but often there can seem like there's a bit of a benefit. But for the most part, what I tend to hear is that even if there is a bit of a benefit or seeming benefit in the early stages, whether it's immediately or in the following couple of days, is that it doesn't really help with healing the impact of childhood or sexual, like childhood trauma, complex trauma. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that, but I have heard a couple of people say that they thought it was helpful. So, whether that is long-term, whether it's helpful, or whether it was helpful short-term, kind of remains to be seen. But that has been my experience. Anecdotally, I have not, I'm sorry, I've got a hair kind of bothering me. Anecdotally, I have not heard from anybody that I know personally or that I've worked with who has had EMDR for childhood or complex trauma and found it beneficial. What I have heard many times is that it actually can make things worse. And there's probably different reasons for that as well. It is important, I think, if somebody's going to do EMDR, that they make sure that they work with somebody who has been practicing EMDR for quite some time and isn't just an EMDR therapist or a trauma therapist, but actually works specifically with survivors of childhood trauma, if that is your trauma. If your trauma is more recent, or kind of a one-time thing in your adult life, any kind of trauma, then EMDR has, from what I understand about EMDR, I've not heard this specifically from people, but I think that it has more chance of being beneficial. Because remember, the long-term impact of complex or childhood trauma, and really even sexual assault as an adult or interpersonal trauma as an adult, isn't just the trauma. It's not that singular experience that you had or experiences that you had that create by themselves a long-term damage. The struggles with relationships and self-doubt and worthiness and anxiety and depression and all of that. What creates the long-term damage is the meaning that you've attached to it. So EMDR isn't really going to help you change that belief system. It can help maybe decrease a symptom or kind of give a quick experience of feeling some relief because you've been able to talk about something that maybe you haven't talked about before. But that's what my experience has kind of taught me. And I actually supervised somebody years ago, and I have talked about this, who did not have a history of childhood trauma, but had a home invasion, and she was home. No sexual trauma. I don't know that she's experienced physical trauma or not. I can't remember, but she witnessed her boyfriend experienced physical trauma. And she was telling me about how helpful EMDR was to her. I had already made the decision not to become an EMDR therapist, but she was talking about it, and I was very interested because it was somebody that didn't have a history of childhood trauma. I really wanted to hear about her experience, and so she was sharing it with me, and she was able to talk about it. She was able to tell me about the experience, but as she spoke about it, her breathing became very rapid and shallow, and she became very red through here. And I asked her if she noticed, like, what do you notice feeling in your body, or something like that is what I asked her. And first she said nothing, and then I said, just sit for a moment and notice what if anything is going on in your body. And she recognized that her breathing had become kind of shallow. And we talked about that a little bit, and I pointed out that I noticed the redness coming up through her chest and her neck, and she did say that she felt hot. So even though she was able to speak about it seemingly without any psychological issue, her body was still reacting significantly to it. And I like to use that example because as survivors of childhood trauma, we already distract. We already deny. We are already, in many ways, desensitized to the experience. We've had to become desensitized. It's part of the way that we coped. A lot of people can talk about their abuse without having any sort of reaction to it. I was one of those people. But it certainly didn't mean that I was healed. It meant that I was completely disconnected from it. So I just would really encourage anybody who considers EMDR to make sure that you're working with somebody that really has a very good understanding of childhood trauma or prolonged trauma, complex trauma, sexual trauma, if those are your issues. Working with clients with those issues, aside from just doing EMDR. I think that that's very important. Yes. Oh, Sharon, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sending you so much peace and healing. I can't imagine. Thank you so much. I'm honored that you decided to share this space with us right now. Sending you so much healing. Please give yourself the space that you need, whatever that might be or might look like. Sharon says EMDR has helped a lot. How to overcome addiction after CSA. So this is a little bit of a complex issue, as I'm sure you probably know. The thing about addiction, whatever it is the addiction is, most people who have addiction issues, it is about a way to try to avoid and numb from dealing with something. So one of the most important things, honestly, to be able to overcome addiction is healing what caused you to turn towards that addiction, that thing that you're addicted to in the first place. So whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, shopping, whatever it may be, drugs, being able to recognize that addiction, that need to numb, deflect, however you want to describe that, but that need to avoid this, it served a purpose. And so it's really important to not have shame about it. it's imperative to not have shame about it, which also is a process. You can't just decide not to have shame about it, but recognize that it served a purpose. And it really is a coping mechanism, just like any other coping mechanism. And coping mechanisms are actually quite addictive. They become something that our mind and our body need and crave and do automatically without having to think about it. And with a lot of coping mechanisms that we develop naturally, the other kinds of coping mechanisms kind of are something that are within us. So we don't need to seek out some sort of outside thing to cope. But recognizing that addiction is a way of coping with something that you weren't able to cope with is important. And then doing the work to heal that is also important. Now, ideally, what you might be able to do is work with somebody on the CSA. I'm assuming you mean child sexual abuse. If not, please correct me. But being able to work with somebody that has a really good foundation of working with trauma survivors, while at the same time working in conjunction with somebody that really understands addiction. And maybe those two people can work together for your benefit. Or if you're like in an outpatient addiction program, working with a trauma therapist at the same time, you may be able to find a trauma therapist that also works in addiction. When I worked with people, because addiction was not my area of specialty, when I worked with somebody who may have been addicted in some way to a substance or a behavior, actually a lot of behaviors I actually worked with, but if it was a substance, then I would often refer out to that person. And if they were willing, I might work with them at the same time. But doing it in conjunction, I think, is really important. In terms of addiction itself, the reality is that you kind of have to change a lot about your everyday life to not be in the same kinds of situations that that kind of enable or make it easier to engage in whatever that addictive behavior is. And that's also incredibly challenging. That's one of the things about like even inpatient addiction treatment centers is you go into the addiction treatment center and you do the steps and all of that. And they talk about needing to change, your environment a little bit. But the reality is most people don't. You go back into your same home, same family, same friends, same work environment, whatever it may be. And it's really hard to break that habitual pattern, addictive pattern, when you're in the same environment and still trying to avoid the things that drove you to that in the first place. It's not easy. One of the reasons why addiction treatment, there's so much recidivism in it, is because it's so incredibly challenging. But you're going to keep going back to those same coping mechanisms, whatever those coping mechanisms are. Self-harm. You're going to keep going back to those coping mechanisms until you deal with and heal what it is you are actually coping with. So I'm sorry that I don't have something really kind of concrete, some steps that I can tell you, but that really is the most important thing, is being able to work through what is driving the addiction. And if it's something that physiologically you're very addicted to, and alcohol certainly can be one of those things, but certainly any sort of drug or something like that, you need medical support also to help kind of get through the withdrawal phase of that, because you don't want to do that on your own, for sure. Let's see. How do I tell my therapist about my flashbacks without getting so angry at myself? This is a really great question. I think, I don't know if you're angry at yourself for having flashbacks, or the flashbacks themselves make you angry, like something that the flashback is about, that you're angry about that particular thing. So it might kind of vary, but in terms of being angry at yourself, for whatever reason, self-compassion. And that's something I'm going to be talking more about in various ways in different platforms. But self-compassion is a really important part of that. So being able to recognize that it's okay that you're angry. It's okay that you feel angry anyway. Acknowledging that it's okay that you feel angry. Probably important to let yourself know, remind yourself that there's nothing to be angry at yourself for. That whatever you're feeling angry about is not something for you to be angry about. The other thing that might be helpful is actually letting your therapist know that you want to share some things with her or him. I don't know if you say specifically there. Letting the therapist know that you have some things that you want to share, or maybe you have some flashbacks you want to share, something like that. But it could be very general, just that you have some things to share. But you anticipate, or you know, or you're afraid that you'll get angry at yourself, or that you won't be able to say it because you're going to get angry at yourself. Being able to do that actually can go a long way. So that actually, it might seem weird, but that actually might be quite helpful. The other thing that you might be able to do is, and most therapists are certainly okay with this, is maybe write down some of the things that you want to share with your therapist. And then, however your therapist would prefer you do this, you could either bring it with you and hand it to your therapist, or you could read it yourself. Maybe you could email your therapist the things that you want to share ahead of time. But you can ask your therapist maybe, or like in session. Or you could, if you have this kind of relationship, if it's okay with your therapist to email in between sessions, you could say, there's some things I want to share with you. Is it best to email you, or should I write it down and give it to you in session? So I think that those are probably the best pieces of advice that I might give you in that regard. But really understanding what it is that you're angry about with that, I think, is also quite important. Can self-harm be an addiction? So I don't know when you wrote this, Isabella, but yes. Or is it that it becomes an automatic response to struggle? Both of those things can be true, because addiction is an automatic response to struggle. But yes, any repetitive behavior, especially something that is not something that we think, oh, I think I'd really like to do this, something that becomes really seemingly impossible to be able to stop when you feel like you're trying really hard, that is an addiction. Now, in terms of substance addiction and stuff like that, obviously it's a little bit different, but an addiction is something that we kind of don't have the ability to just stop, right? And you can look at a lot of different kinds of behaviors that way, something that drives us to do it. And even with self-harm, there is a physiological thing that drives us to do that. So absolutely, it can be considered an addiction, and it is also an automatic response. It becomes a learned response. Like, it's not necessarily the first time we feel bad in some way, we automatically choose self-harm. We discover that self-harm works, kind of like we discover that having a few drinks helps us feel a little bit better. We discover if we self-harm in some way, and sometimes it's even accidental. You don't set out to self-harm, but maybe you do something, injure yourself, but you realize that there's some release in that. So yes to both of those questions. If I answer your question, but it doesn't really fully answer it, please feel free to let me know that. If I'm answering somebody else's question and it brings up a question for you, feel free to leave it in the comments. So if you have your beverage, I hope you're enjoying it. I'm going to take a little drink real quick. Can you speak to the pattern of self-protective parts that has one push and pull away from relationship? Yes. So I could really do several videos on this. So that push and pull, I think we've all experienced it to some degree, whether it's a friend that kind of just feels like a little bit of a weird relationship, maybe even a family member where you love them, but you don't enjoy spending time with them. But then if you don't see them, you feel different things about not seeing them. Certainly with a partner, that can happen quite often. And for anybody who's been in therapy, it can definitely happen in that realm as well. In fact, it's a very common thing that can happen in therapy. And this is true for people with all kinds of backgrounds. So it's certainly not only for people that have like childhood trauma or trauma in general. Though when you have had experiences in your early life that you've needed, like you've had relationships, not experiences that you've needed, but you've had relationships that you've needed to have, that you've wanted to have, and that relationship left you hurt in some way. And more specifically, if you grew up in a home where your needs were not met, where you didn't feel like you could really be yourself. You didn't feel like you could feel and it would be okay. You didn't feel like you could ask for something and it would be okay. You felt like you maybe had to be perfect or not be seen or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of different ways that this can happen. But if you've had those kinds of experiences, if you've had neglect, that is definitely a huge one that can create a push-pull in lots of different types of relationships. If you've been betrayed by somebody that you should have been able to trust as a young person, it's going to create some push and pull in relationships. And the more vulnerable that relationship is in your adult life, the more vulnerable that relationship is, the more push-pull there is going to be. It's just the reality, because there's a lot more at stake. When you're vulnerable, there's a lot more risk that you're taking. There's a lot more at stake. You're going to be hurt potentially more. If you're going to be hurt, it's going to hurt a lot more in a relationship where you're really vulnerable than it would if it was somebody that you were just an acquaintance with. So the more vulnerable, the more likely there is to be that push and pull. So the self-protective aspect is not wanting to feel that hurt again, ultimately, even if you don't consciously recognize that there was hurt. And that can make it incredibly confusing, because if you're in kind of a state of denial that, oh no, that stuff doesn't bother me, I healed that, it was in the past, it doesn't bother me anymore. Of course, that's not the reality unless you've really done the deep work of healing it. So if you've been in denial about it at all, it's going to have even more impact. But then when you're in a relationship that feels vulnerable, and there could be lots of reasons why it might feel vulnerable, certainly a partnership, a therapeutic relationship, and even a friendship, if friendships are maybe a little bit challenging, or maybe a friendship that's really developing into a much deeper friendship, that's going to feel a lot more vulnerable as well. So if you're feeling vulnerable and you start to engage in a relationship that's more vulnerable, so even if you're not feeling vulnerable, I suppose, that vulnerability is going to kick in, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. And there's going to be a part of you that desires a connection, even if not consciously. But then there's also this self-protective part. And remember, the self-protective part is the strongest part. It comes from the reptilian brain, right? You've all heard of that. the part of your brain that is survival. It's what allows you to breathe and all of that. So it's the survival part of your brain. So there's a part of you that desires connection, and that's more a conscious thing. But your survival aspect was developed very early on. And through your experiences, your survival aspect, your survival mechanism kicked in because you weren't safe. So it taught you that the way to stay safe, to not be hurt, was to shut down, to not trust people, to not want anything from anybody, to not depend on anybody. Because if you do, you're going to be hurt. So on some level, conscious or not, we end up developing this wall that doesn't allow us to fully engage because it's self-protecting. Now, on a conscious level, we may engage, but it's going to be to a certain degree, which is why connection can feel so challenging and why I'm often met with eye rolls and rebuttals about connection and the importance of it. So that survival mechanism is there. It's going to be there until you've been able to do a lot of really deep healing work. But on the other side, you're desiring connection, you're being vulnerable, you're creating this relationship, which feels very vulnerable. And so anything, almost anything, can feel not good. And if there's just an inkling, just a moment of doubt, that self-protective mechanism kicks into high gear, especially if you're not conscious of it, which most of us are not, because again, it's part of our survival mechanism. So if there's even just a hint, the survival mechanism kicks in, the wall goes up, and we do one of two things. We either completely withdraw and maybe isolate, but we want to withdraw, we want to run from that relationship, or that self-protective mechanism. So it either causes us to withdraw, so we withdraw into that, or that self-protective mechanism can come up and it can cause us to act out. And so if we withdraw, we tend to withdraw from people, become maybe more depressed, more anxious, we isolate. If it instead, and people tend to go one of two ways, it's about coping. But if instead on the other side of that, instead of withdrawing, the self-protective piece can be to push away. So the pull is withdraw. The push away often is the self-protective thing coming up and being kind of the thoughts becoming very different and wanting to really push that person away, finding all kinds of reasons to push that person away, finding all kinds of reasons that are often not necessarily real, but we can find all kinds of things. We can make something really feel much bigger than maybe it is, because that's the way our mind works, and it's working that way very intentionally to make you say, this person isn't safe. And so then, in becoming angry, in doing things that maybe make that person want to go away, it then actually serves another purpose. Not only are you feeling more safe, but it also then serves a purpose of reinforcing the belief that nobody's safe. So if you can believe that person isn't safe, you allowed yourself to be vulnerable and that person has shown themselves not to be safe, then okay, I can go back to, it's better not to trust anybody. It's better not to be vulnerable. It's better to not depend on anybody. Because even though that ultimately doesn't really feel good at all, it feels safe. And if you think of the hierarchy of needs, safety, right, is the foundation. So even though it may not feel good, even though we may really want these other things, our survival mechanism is saying, nope, none of that matters. What matters is staying safe, even if it doesn't feel good. And so that push and pull can become huge, huge, huge. And of course, it can create difficulty because if you withdraw into yourself and you don't respond to the person that you've been building this relationship with, they're going to think, well, what's wrong with her? Why isn't she responding to me? And that person may try to reach out to you or whatever. Over time, that person's probably going to give up. And then that's going to also prove to you that people don't really care, that they can't be trusted, that you can't depend on them. And then, of course, if you go the other way, it's obviously going to make people feel uncomfortable, not safe, not good, whatever. And so then they're going to pull away, which then, again, is going to prove to you that people are not trustworthy. And this is a huge issue for a lot of people. And again, not even just people with trauma histories. And it is ultimately an attachment issue. And we all, I think, have attachment issues to some degree. But certainly when you've had any childhood trauma, there's going to be attachment issues, without a doubt. It's impossible to not have some attachment issues. So hopefully that helped. And I will say too that this push-pull, the attachment issue stuff, that is actually what causes people often to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is part of the reason that I don't believe in borderline personality disorder as an actual disorder or as a real thing, because there's a reason that it's happening. It's not a personality disorder. There's a thing that's happening. There's this safety and desire for connection that are fighting with one another over and over and over again. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so now it's called a disorder, which it's not, in my opinion. What is the difference between burnout and depression? Let me think about this for a second. I don't think that, it kind of depends on what you're talking about with burnout, and like in what kind of capacity maybe. But I think that I don't think that being burnt out is necessarily going to cause depression, like true depression. However, if there's already some underlying anxiety, some underlying depression, even if it's not like clinical, then burnout is going to exacerbate that. Either one of those things. I think they are different things, but they can definitely go together, and burnout can certainly make depression and anxiety worse. Depending on, like, if you're feeling really burnt out about something, but it doesn't seem like it makes sense that you would be that burnt out about it, I would say that there's probably some underlying stuff that is also going on besides just feeling burnt out about that one specific thing. But that's kind of a general statement. So I don't know if that necessarily applies to your specific question or not. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope so. Yeah, BS is saying about emailing the therapist. I have a lot of people that email me things that they would find very difficult to be able to talk about face to face. I don't know. Okay. Good grief. Sorry, I'm just removing a bunch of silly, stupid posts. This is the downside of doing live. Put down my dog last week. He was doing fine, but I didn't want to take any chances. Oh, good grief. Who are these people? I'm sorry. Sorry, I just reported a post. All right. Sorry, everybody. Let me come back up here. Thank you, Isabella. I'm sorry that it is taking up this time, but I am actually going through and I don't know why this isn't working. Sorry, I'm trying to report. I'm not sure if I trust my therapist enough to share my real feelings. That is a really hard thing to kind of learn to trust within yourself. I would say check in with yourself and see, have there been things that your therapist has done, responded, ways that your therapist has responded, returned phone calls, shown up for the sessions consistently? Are there things that you might be able to point to that might help you see that your therapist has not given you any reason to not trust? Starting with those small things can help build within your system, your body, that you have been safe. This is also a situation where I think you could say, if it feels okay, I mean, I know it's going to feel very vulnerable, but I think that's something that's important to be able to talk with a therapist about too. You could say, I know I'm assuming that she might know what your history is. You could say, I know that there's a lot of things that I feel like I'm not saying because I'm just having difficulty really trusting. And no therapist, no good therapist anyway, is going to have a problem with that. They're going to completely understand that. And it can really go a long way in helping create an opportunity to have a conversation that can really be very beneficial. So a couple things that you might do there. Oh, sorry. All right. I was scared today, not of the surgery. I was scared that yes, I really did not want to wake up from anesthesia. It scared me. People with trauma histories often have so much difficulty with things that we don't have control over. And being under anesthesia can feel incredibly triggering for a lot of people. And it's helpful to be able to talk to your doctor about that. Nicola, I'm not sure if you shared this before I answered the question, or before I talked about borderline personality as a disorder or not, but I will briefly just kind of say it again. I don't agree with it as a disorder, as a diagnosis. I don't. And I've known people that would fit the category, the criteria, if you look at it. So it's not that I don't think that those things are real. They're absolutely real. But I don't believe that it should be a diagnosis that we give people. For one, by far, like 90%, or at least relatively recently, that was the case, of people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder have a history of childhood trauma. And my guess is the other 10% just haven't disclosed that they have a history of childhood trauma. So I don't agree with it as a actual diagnosis. Okay. I don't know if I'll have the ability. I will actually go through and try to remove these people, block these people like permanently. So I believe that I have answered all the questions that were posed, real questions. If you have asked something that I have not responded to, or if you've shared a comment that I've not responded to, please, if you don't mind sharing it again, because I do want to make sure that I can acknowledge you, and I very easily could have missed it because of all these other comments. Yeah, Sharon, I really hope that that this is something that you can talk with your therapist about. And if I would also really encourage you to consider a support group for infant loss, whether it is miscarriage or even after the birth of a child. This is definitely something that will take a long time to heal and to grieve. So I really hope that you give yourself the space that you need to do that. And a support group really can be very, very beneficial. Mr. Goodman, I'm not sure what your question was. It's possible if it was a true question, I may have inadvertently deleted it, trying to delete some of these other ones. So if it is a true actual question related to the topic at hand, the topics at hand, something that I can actually answer for you that is relevant, I am happy to try to answer that. So you are welcome to share that again if you would like. But I don't know that it was an actual question. So I am planning on doing some more lives here over the coming weeks to just kind of connect with you all and get us through this holiday season. Hi, Lisa. Yes. I'm going to answer that in just a second. So I am going to plan on doing some more of these. It will be Q&A, and maybe we'll talk about something very specific or not. I will be sharing a little bit. I'm not sure how it's going to look yet, but I'm going to be sharing a little bit about both my upcoming book and the course that I created on boundaries. So I'll be sharing both of those things with you and talk a little bit more about them. So, and I try to remove people and I can't remove people. All right, your question. Lisa, speak to underachieving as it relates to trauma. I can definitely relate to this, as can many of the people that I know, both personally and professionally. So the simple response to that with underachieving really is unworthiness. And I think that that's true, even unrelated to trauma, but certainly for trauma survivors, that when you do not believe that you are worthy or deserving, you naturally either don't try to achieve things or experience certain things, or if you do, it's not a conscious thing, but often you will sabotage it. That's also something I have personal experience with. Because, and it is true that a lot of people will never even try to achieve or go after something or even let themselves imagine that they want something different. That absolutely happens. And it does also happen that sometimes people will have an idea that they want something, but and then maybe even feel really excited and feel really energized and go after it. And this is something that I used to do. And then immediately find that they do something unconsciously that sabotages it. So that could look a lot of different ways. This can also happen in relationships, going back to the push-pull. That like you could really like somebody as a potential partner or a friend, and because you believe that you're not worthy of it, and some of those push-pull things, because you're afraid, people can be afraid of success. Like we talk often about people being afraid of failure, which is certainly a very real thing, but people can also be afraid of success, and that can look a lot of different ways. But ultimately, it all comes down to not believing that you are worthy of achieving something different, that it's not possible for you or your life. And that can look so many different ways, but that is ultimately what happens. And that's why, like, even like with coaching, like you can, a lot of people might work with a coach on underachieving, procrastinating, that kind of thing. And you might feel some benefit. You might feel kind of energized. You might be able to put some things in practice really immediately, and feel good. But then eventually it's not going to work anymore. And the reason for that is because you're not dealing with why that's an issue in the first place. Going back to the whole conversation around addiction, if you're not really dealing with why ultimately you believe that you're not worthy or you're not deserving or not capable, then you're going to keep repeating the same patterns. So you need to be able to work through that to help you trust in yourself, that you are worthy, that you are capable, that you are deserving, that you can, that you're not going to lose people. People aren't going to hate you, or whatever the ideas may be in doing that. So, I mean, there's a whole lot more that I could probably say about that, but that is ultimately why, and why people continue to struggle with the same things over and over again, even if they've been to therapy and maybe talked about some different things, but maybe haven't really gotten at the root of what that unworthiness is really about, or that even that unworthiness is actually the issue. Then again, any benefit that you get in whatever work you're doing, coaching, reading self-help, whatever it may be, hypnotherapy, that it's going to likely be a temporary fix, so to speak, because you're not dealing with those real issues. And it's why a lot of people who have trauma issues and they go to therapy and maybe are in therapy for years and years and years don't really see any progress, because they're not dealing with the real issues. They're not really getting at the root of what the symptoms actually are, because it's not just symptoms, right? The symptoms are there for a reason. Very conscious of it, just don't know how to fix it. Well, you begin to believe that you're worthy, which takes a whole lot of healing. It does. It really does take a lot of healing, and it takes time. It's not just how much work you put into it. You have to continue it over time. It's practice over time, over time, over time, again and again. So I really want to thank you for being here. I do see another question, Bia. I'm going to answer your question, and then I'm going to get off shortly. But I am looking forward to connecting with you more live, and depending on how it goes, how it's received, if you guys find benefit in it, then maybe in the new year, I will really look at doing this on a more regular basis, maybe a bi-weekly chat or something like that. I don't know exactly what that might look like, but that might be something that, if this feels helpful, if I can learn how to block people a little bit better, I'd actually be happy to do it. So I might look into figuring out how that could look. So let me know if you feel like you would like to have this. Maybe if I'm going to do it regularly, maybe have a topic and then have some Q&A. Maybe we just connect and talk about whatever's going on. So how about overachievers or perfectionists? Just destined to be that way, or will it change with healing? So overachievers and perfectionists is also about unworthiness. It can also, one aspect of it can be about distraction. A lot of people use being very busy, being very focused, needing everything to be perfect as a way to not deal with the other things, because it keeps your mind pretty busy. It can also be a fear of failure. So wanting, which is about unworthiness, but it can be a way to try to feel worthy by achieving all these things. So absolutely, you are not destined to always be a perfectionist or overachiever. If you can understand why you have that drive and need to overachieve. I was a perfectionist as well, and maybe still am a little bit. That doesn't mean that I ever did anything perfectly, because I definitely did not. But what it means for me in my life, and there are different ways this can look, I was not an overachiever. I was a perfectionist that was paralyzed by the need to be perfect. So instead of overachieving, my perfectionism kept me from doing things because I was afraid of failing. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do it. And if I couldn't do it perfectly, then I wasn't going to do it. That's not healthy either. That's definitely not healthy. Neither one is healthy. Being emotionally well is about finding the balance overall in that. So it will definitely continue to change. But it is important, I think, to just acknowledge that that is a very real issue, so that you can understand how it shows up, maybe what triggers it to show up, what happens if you don't, like if you feel like something isn't perfect. So I think it is an important thing to specifically address, but it does actually kind of organically get a little bit better as you heal whatever that original wounding is. It's no easy feat, Lisa. You are right. Would love this more often. Okay. Well, I will probably send out some things to try to get more feedback on that as well, and what that might look like. But thank you. I actually thought that I might do that this year, but 2020 kind of took a turn that none of us expected, and so kind of went off the rails a little bit. I know if I can't succeed at something, I just don't do it. Yeah, that was definitely me. And to be honest with you, I think that that's not exactly where I am now, but there are certainly times that that's still kind of present. It doesn't necessarily completely keep me from doing something, but it can certainly stall it. For sure. So it's definitely a very real issue that a lot of people struggle with. Oh, good, Michelle. Well, I'm looking forward to connecting with all of you going forward. And I will also look forward to sharing with you Deeply Rooted is my book that will be coming out on December 8th and will be available for pre-orders soon. It will be available on different retail sites, but I will have it available on my website as well because people have asked for signed copies. So that will be available on my website. I can't do a signed copy, obviously, if you buy it somewhere else. But I will share that information with you when that is available. And then the Boundaries course, I am hoping to have out and available maybe next week, just in time to, well, not Thanksgiving in the US, but certainly for the kind of Christmas, Hanukkah season. So that will be coming as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining me. I apologize for the ridiculousness. There's a lot of unhealthy people out there, right? Everybody's wounded. So I will look forward to connecting with you soon. Will you have your book on Audible? My attention span is short. This is so interesting, Sharon. I actually have a lot of difficulty listening to an Audible or an audiobook because unless my eyes are closed, I have to have my eyes closed to listen to an audiobook almost always. Because if my eyes are open, whatever I'm looking at just draws my attention away. So it's interesting that for you, you're able to be more focused. For me, not at all. I am looking at doing an Audible. Somebody suggested that to me, and I obviously record things because I do meditations, but I really don't know anything right now about recording an audio book, but I am looking into it. The other thing is it's a guided journal, so I'm not quite sure how to do that. I don't know. I'm looking into it, and I am hoping to have it as an audio version as well. But even with an audio version, I actually think having the journal itself would probably be helpful because the journal itself does have space to write, but also just having it to kind of maybe go along with it and then being able to write in it, or certainly having your own journal to write in. Oh, okay. Well, that makes perfect sense. I'm glad you popped in too, Lisa. So Sharon, stay tuned because I am planning on doing it as an audio version. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like or sound like yet, but I am planning on doing an audio version as well. So you can just make sure that you have a journal to be able to write in. All right, everybody. So I will let you know when the next one is going to be. I will try to schedule it a little bit more ahead of time. If you've got feedback of time of day that works best for you. So I had asked people 11 a.m. Pacific or 3 p.m. Pacific. And I got some feedback, and 3 p.m. Pacific seemed the time that worked best for the majority of people anyway. So even after this is over, in fact, I would encourage you when this is over, because those comments will be something I can see easily. When this is over, if you want to come back in and leave your preference for time of day, so like around 11 a.m. Pacific or maybe around 3 p.m. Pacific, which time might work best for you, that would be helpful for me. And I may, if I'm going to do it regular, I may do it at alternate times. Maybe 1 week do it at an earlier time, maybe 1 week do it at a later time, so people can join in different time zones. So I will look forward to seeing you all very soon. And if you're not following me on Facebook, but you are on Facebook, please follow me on Facebook, because that's where I share lots of stuff. I do some lives there, and that's where I share lots of information. I really don't share much on Twitter or Instagram. I don't understand Instagram. And I really very rarely share on Twitter. So if you are on Facebook, please follow me at Courageous Journeys, because that's where I'm sharing a lot of stuff. So I will look forward to seeing you all very soon. Take care. Bye.